The morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty streets of Mercy's Bend as Eliza Harlow made her way toward the market square. She pulled her worn shawl tighter around her shoulders, not against the autumn chill, but against the stares that followed her like hungry wolves. A year had passed since Thomas died, yet the town's cruelty had only sharpened with time. Her boots clicked against the wooden boardwalk, each step deliberate and measured. She'd learned to walk with purpose, eyes fixed ahead, never meeting the gazes of those who whispered behind gloved hands or spat tobacco juice dangerously close to her hem. The basket on her arm held 3 loaves of bread, still warm from her oven, and a handful of mended shirts she hoped to sell or trade. "There goes the widow," muttered Mrs. Henderson to her companion, loud enough for Eliza to hear, bold as brass, walking our streets like she owns them. Eliza's jaw tightened, but she kept walking. The Henderson woman had been particularly vicious since Thomas's death, spreading tales that grew wilder with each telling. According to the gossips, Eliza had driven her husband to gambling, to drinking, to an early grave. Some even whispered she'd pushed him from that horse herself. The memory of that night still haunted her. Thomas stumbling through their door, reeking of whiskey and fear, babbling about debts and dangerous men. The next morning, his horse had returned alone, and they'd found Thomas's body at the bottom of Miller's Gulch, his neck broken. An accident, Sheriff Riles had declared, though his eyes had said otherwise. At the market, Eliza set up her modest display near the alley, far from the respectable vendors. Mrs. Abernathy's egg stand occupied the prime corner spot, the portly woman presiding over her domain like a queen. Their eyes met briefly, and Eliza saw the familiar mixture of contempt and satisfaction in the older woman's face. "Fresh bread," Eliza called softly, though she knew few would come. Mending done with care. A young mother approached tentatively, eyeing the golden loaves, just as she reached for her purse. "Mrs." Abernathy's voice cut through the air. "Mary Sullivan, you'd buy from her, after what she did to poor Thomas?" The young woman flushed and hurried away, leaving Eliza standing alone. This was how it always went. The decent folk of Mercy's Bend had decided her fate the day they'd buried Thomas, and nothing she did could change their minds. The morning dragged on. A few rough men from the mining camps bought bread, leering as they dropped coins into her palm. One grabbed her wrist, holding it too long, until she jerked away. They laughed, ugly sounds that made her skin crawl. "Pretty thing like you shouldn't be all alone," one called after her. "I could keep you warm at night." She said nothing, had learned that words only made it worse, but inside, something withered a little more. This was her life now, caught between being shunned by the respectable folk and preyed upon by those who saw her isolation as opportunity. Near noon, a group of boys appeared, the banker's son Billy among them. Eliza's stomach knotted. The children were often the cruelest, their taunts sharp as broken glass. "Which woman?" Billy chanted, and the others took it up. "Which woman? Which woman? Killed her man." One boy scooped up a handful of pebbles. The first one struck her shoulder, more following in quick succession. Eliza raised her arm to shield her face, knocking over her basket in the process. The remaining loaves tumbled into the dirt. "That's enough fun, boys," came a man's voice, stern but not unkind. "Run along now." Eliza looked up to see Samuel Morrison, the general store owner. For a moment, hope flickered, but he wasn't looking at her, his eyes fixed firmly on the scattered bread. He stepped around her and continued on his way. The boys dispersed, laughing, kneeling in the dust. Eliza gathered her spoiled loaves. Her hands shook slightly, though whether from anger or despair, she couldn't say. A shadow fell across her, and she tensed, expecting more torment, but no words came. After a moment, she glanced up to find a stranger standing nearby, a cowboy by his dress, with dust-covered boots and a well-worn hat pulled low. He wasn't looking at her directly, just standing there like he was waiting for something. When Mrs. Abernathy chose that moment to accidentally knock over her water bucket, sending a muddy stream toward Eliza. The widow scrambled back. Her hand slipped in the mud, and she fell hard, her carefully mended dress soaking through. The market square erupted in laughter. Even the minister's wife tittered behind her handkerchief. Eliza sat in the mud, her ruined bread around her, feeling something inside her finally break. She'd endured a year of this, a year of punishment for the crime of surviving when her husband hadn't. "Show's over," the stranger said quietly, and somehow his calm voice cut through the laughter. People began to drift away, back to their business, leaving Eliza sitting in the mud. She started to rise, slipped, caught herself. Her cheeks burned with humiliation. Then a hand appeared in her vision, sun-browned, calloused, steady. She looked up at the cowboy, really seeing him now. Dark hair showed beneath his hat, and his eyes were gray as winter sky. There was no pity in them, no leer, just a quiet steadiness that made her throat tight. After a heartbeat's hesitation, she took his hand. His grip was firm as he helped her to her feet, then immediately released her, stepping back to a proper distance. He bent to gather her things, placing the ruined bread back in her basket with surprising gentleness. "Thank you," she whispered, the words barely audible. He handed her the basket, and for just a moment, their eyes met properly. "You don't deserve this," he said, so quiet she almost thought she'd imagined it. Then he touched his hat brim and walked away, leaving Eliza standing in the empty square with mud on her dress and those 4 words echoing in her mind. She couldn't remember the last time anyone had spoken to her with simple human kindness. That night, as she sat in her cold kitchen, trying to salvage what bread she could, Eliza found herself thinking about the stranger's gray eyes, Jack Rourke. She'd heard someone call him a drifter who'd appeared in town 3 days ago, keeping to himself, asking questions about some old trouble. She shook her head, banishing such thoughts. She'd learned the hard way that hope was a luxury she couldn't afford. Tomorrow would bring the same struggles, the same cruel faces, the same empty hours stretching toward an uncertain future. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling her loose shutters. Winter was coming, and her woodpile was low. The roof leaked in 2 places. The last of Thomas's hidden money had run out months ago. She didn't know how much longer she could hold on. But what choice did she have? This house, falling apart as it was all she had left. As she prepared for bed, Eliza caught sight of herself in the cracked mirror. 26 years old, but she looked older. The prettiness that had once made Thomas notice her had faded into something harder, marked by grief and endurance. The townspeople called her a temptress, a witch, a dozen other ugly names, but all she saw was a tired woman trying to survive. She thought again of the cowboy's words. "You don't deserve this." Such a simple statement, yet it had shaken something loose inside her. For a year, she'd almost started to believe the town's verdict, that she was cursed, that she'd brought misfortune on herself and everyone around her. But one stranger's kindness had reminded her of a truth she'd almost forgotten. She was just a woman who'd lost her husband under suspicious circumstances, trying to make her way in a world that had decided she was guilty without trial. As she lay in her narrow bed, listening to mice scratch in the walls, Eliza allowed herself one moment of weakness. She pressed her face into her thin pillow and wept. For Thomas, for herself, for the life she'd lost and the nightmare she couldn't escape. Tomorrow, she'd put on her mask of stoic endurance again. Tonight, alone in the dark, she mourned. She didn't know that across town, in a room above the saloon, Jack Rourke sat by his window, thinking about a woman with wounded eyes and quiet dignity. He'd come to Mercy's Bend seeking answers about his brother's death, but today he'd witnessed something that stirred old angers, the sight of a town turning its collective back on one of its own. He'd seen it before, knew how quickly fear and superstition could poison decent folks, but there'd been something about the way she'd sat in that mud, momentarily broken but not beaten, that had moved him to speak. Just 4 words, but he'd meant them. Jack pulled out a creased letter, reading again the last words his brother Luke had written. "They're setting me up. Jack, the sheriff, The mayor. Others too. There's something rotten in this town. Luke had died in a jail cell, allegedly by his own hand, before Jack could reach him. But Jack knew his brother. Luke would never have given up like that. Someone in Mercy's Bend had blood on their hands, and Jack meant to find out who. But tonight, his thoughts kept drifting to a woman with mousy brown hair and steady hands, who'd taken his help with dignity and thanked him in a whisper. He wondered how long she'd been facing the town's cruelty alone. He wondered why they hated her so. Most of all, he wondered why he cared. He'd learned long ago not to get involved in other people's troubles. He had his own mission here. But something about Eliza Harlow had slipped past his defenses, and he had a feeling that was going to complicate things considerably. The wind howled through the gaps in the buildings, carrying the scent of coming snow. Winter in Wyoming was brutal, especially for those without friends or family to help them through. Jack found himself hoping the widow's house was warmer than it looked. Tomorrow, he told himself, he'd focus on Luke's case. Tonight, though, he couldn't shake the image of a woman gathering muddy bread with shaking hands. While a whole town laughed at her misfortune, he'd spoken truly. She didn't deserve their cruelty. What he hadn't said, what he was only beginning to realize, was that he was already planning to do something about it. The October wind howled through the gaps in Eliza's fence, toppling 2 more sections of the already rickety structure. She stood in her doorway, wrapped in a thin blanket, watching her last defense against the world crumble. Without a proper fence, the wild dogs would get into her chicken coop, and those 6 hens were all that stood between her and complete destitution. She'd tried to repair it herself last week, but her hands weren't strong enough to drive the posts deep, and she had no money for new boards. The townsmen who might have helped for a fair wage wouldn't come near the widow Harlow's property. Bad luck, they said, might be catching. Eliza was still contemplating the ruined fence when she heard footsteps on the path. Her hand moved instinctively to the kitchen knife tucked in her apron. But it was only Jack Rourke, the quiet cowboy from the market, carrying an armload of fence posts and a bucket of nails. "Mornin', ma'am," he said, touching his hat brim. "Noticed your fence took a beating in that wind last night." She stared at him, momentarily speechless. In the week since the market incident, she'd glimpsed him around town but hadn't expected to see him here. "Mr. Rourke, I can't pay you." "Didn't ask for payment." He set down his load and surveyed the damage with a practiced eye. "Mind if I get to work? Hate to see good chickens become coyote dinner." The refusal sat ready on her tongue. She'd learned not to accept help, knowing it always came with a price. But something in his manner, the way he'd already started sorting boards without waiting for permission, made her swallow her protests. "There's coffee," she heard herself say, "if you'd like some." He glanced up, a hint of a smile creasing his weathered face. "That'd be welcome, ma'am." Eliza retreated inside, her hands trembling slightly as she poured coffee into her least chipped cup. Through the window, she watched him work. He moved with economical grace, every motion purposeful. Within an hour, he'd done more than she'd managed in days. When she brought out the coffee, he paused, pulling off his work gloves. They stood awkwardly for a moment, her holding the cup, him seeming unsure whether to take it. "You can sit," she said, gesturing to the porch step. "If you like." He settled himself carefully, maintaining a respectful distance. Up close, she could see the lines around his eyes, the slight gray threading through his dark hair. Older than she'd first thought, maybe 35 to her 26. "Been in Mercy's Bend long?" he asked, sipping the coffee. 3 years, came here with my husband." The words came easier than expected. "You're new to town, few weeks." He stared out at the prairie beyond her property. "Looking into some old business." They lapsed into silence. But it wasn't uncomfortable. Eliza found herself relaxing incrementally. Some tension she'd carried for months, slowly unwinding. When was the last time she'd simply sat with another person, sharing nothing more complicated than coffee and quiet? "I should get back to it," Jack said eventually, rising. "Thank you for the coffee, Mrs. Harlow. Eliza, she said impulsively. Just Eliza is fine. He nodded slowly. Jack, then, over the following days, he returned to finish the fence. Eliza tried to keep her distance, but found herself drawn to the window, watching him work. On the third day, she ventured out with lunch, just cornbread and beans, but he accepted with apparent gratitude. You don't have to do this, she said as they ate on the porch. Whatever the reason you're helping, I don't need charity. Jack set down his plate, considering his words. My ma used to say that folks helping folks wasn't charity. It was just being human. He paused. Been a while since I remembered that, myself. The town won't like it. You being here. Reckon that's their problem, not mine. His calm certainty made something flutter in her chest. When had she become so afraid of others' opinions? But she knew the answer. It had happened gradually. Each cruel word and turned back, chipping away at her confidence until fear was all that remained. As the afternoon wore on, she found herself talking more freely. Small things at first. The challenge of keeping chickens. The early frost threatening her small garden. Jack listened with genuine attention, occasionally offering practical suggestions. Could bank earth higher around those potatoes, he said. Might save them if we get another cold snap. We. The word slipped out before she could catch it. He glanced at her, something unreadable in his gray eyes. Figure of speech, though I could show you, if you'd like. That evening, after he'd left, Eliza sat in her kitchen feeling oddly unsettled. The fence stood solid and straight, better than Thomas had ever built it. But more disturbing than Jack's competence was the warmth she'd felt sitting beside him, the dangerous comfort of conversation. She knew she should discourage his visits. Nothing good could come of it. Already, Mrs. Henderson had passed by twice, her narrow face pinched with disapproval. Tomorrow the whole town would be talking. But when Jack appeared the next morning with his tools and a suggestion to fix her leaking roof, Eliza heard herself agreeing. She was tired of being afraid, tired of accepting the slow deterioration of her life. If he was willing to help despite the town's certain censure, who was she to refuse? They developed a rhythm over the following weeks. Jack would arrive mid-morning, work steadily with occasional breaks for coffee or lunch, and leave before dark. They talked sporadically, about practical things mostly, though sometimes their conversation wandered to safer memories. Her childhood in Missouri, his years working cattle drives. Must have been lonely, she said one afternoon, watching him replace rotted boards in her small barn. All those months on the trail. Sometimes, he hammered a nail home with 2 precise strikes. But there's a difference between being alone and being lonely. Out there, with just the cattle and stars. A man knows where he stands. And in towns, his mouth quirked. Towns are complicated. She understood that. In town, she was never alone, but always achingly lonely, surrounded by people who'd decided her worth and found it wanting. But here, working alongside Jack in companionable silence, she felt neither alone nor lonely, just present, human, real. One evening, as October bled into November, he lingered later than usual, helping her cover the more tender plants against frost. The sun set in magnificent reds and purples, and they stood together watching it paint the endless Wyoming sky. Beautiful country, Jack murmured. Hard, but beautiful. Yes. She wrapped her shawl tighter, aware of his solid presence beside her. Though sometimes the hardness is all I see. He turned to look at her then, his expression serious. That why you were crying, that night after the market? Heat flooded her cheeks. She'd forgotten how small towns were, how her house sat visible from the saloon. You saw? Window faces this way. He seemed embarrassed by the admission. Wasn't spying, just noticed. Everyone in this town notices everything about me, she said bitterly. Every move I make, every word I speak. They're all waiting for me to prove them right about what kind of woman I am. What kind is that? The question, asked so simply, broke something open in her. The kind who drives men to ruin, who brings bad luck, who... She stopped. unable to voice the uglier accusations. "You blame yourself for your husband's death." It wasn't a question. Eliza closed her eyes, remembering Thomas's last days. The drinking, the gambling, the fear that clung to him like smoke. He changed after we came here, got involved with the wrong people. If we'd stayed in Missouri, Jack's voice was gentle but firm. Dangerous word, that if my brother hadn't come to this town, if I'd answered his letter sooner, if can drive a person mad. She looked at him sharply. Your brother? He'd never mentioned family before. Jack's jaw tightened, and for a moment she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, Luke died in the town jail last year. They said he killed himself. I know better. The pieces clicked into place. His questions around town. His interest in the sheriff and mayor. You're investigating his death. Among other things, his eyes met hers. Your husband owed money to some powerful people when he died. Same people who had my brother arrested on false charges. Eliza's blood chilled. You think Thomas was murdered? I think this town has secrets, and I think you've been paying for knowing some of them, whether you realize it or not. They stood in gathering darkness, the weight of shared loss heavy between them. Finally, Jack cleared his throat. I should go, but Eliza, he paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. Be careful, and if anything happens, anything that frightens you, there's a blue kerchief in your barn, tucked behind the third board from the door. Leave it on your fence post, and I'll come. Before she could respond, he was walking away, his figure quickly swallowed by shadows. Eliza stood alone, mind racing. She'd thought the town's cruelty was born of simple prejudice and superstition. But what if Jack was right? What if Thomas had died for what he knew, and she'd been slowly crushed not from casual malice, but deliberate design? That night, she checked the barn, finding the kerchief exactly where Jack had said. The fabric was soft between her fingers, a tangible promise of aid. She tucked it back carefully, hoping she'd never need it, but profoundly grateful for its presence. As she prepared for bed, Eliza caught herself humming, the first time in over a year. Her house was warmer, steadier, more secure thanks to Jack's work. But more than that, she felt less alone in the world. Someone saw her as more than the town pariah. Someone thought her worth protecting. It was dangerous, this feeling. She knew that. Knew too that the town's scrutiny would only intensify as Jack continued visiting. But as she lay listening to the wind test her new solid fence, Eliza allowed herself a moment of quiet hope. Perhaps she didn't have to face the winter alone. Perhaps, despite everything, there was still kindness to be found in this hard land. And perhaps Jack Rourke, with his steady hands and searching questions, had come to Mercy's Bend for more than one kind of justice. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight, knowing someone cared whether she lived or died, whether she suffered or found peace. Eliza Harlow slept without nightmares for the first time in months. In her dreams, she sat on a porch in spring sunshine, coffee in hand, watching a man in a dusty hat repair her broken world one board at a time. The first snow came early that year, dusting the mountains like sugar on bitter bread. Eliza stood at her kitchen window, watching the white peaks emerge from morning clouds. When she heard the commotion from town, raised voices carried on the cold wind, and she could see a crowd gathering near the saloon. Jack had been coming to her place for nearly a month now, transforming her crumbling homestead into something sturdy and safe. With each repair, she'd felt herself growing stronger too, as if the boards he hammered were somehow shoring up her own foundation. She'd even ventured into town twice, head high, ignoring the whispers that followed like smoke. But something in those distant shouts made her stomach clench with old, familiar dread. By afternoon, she knew Mrs. Morrison from the general store happened by, the first neighbor to approach her property in months. Thought you should know, the woman said, not meeting Eliza's eyes. That Cowboy friend of yours has been stirring up trouble. Sheriff Riles don't take kindly to outsiders asking questions about official business. There's talk of running him out of town after Mrs. Morrison left. Eliza paced her small kitchen, indecision gnawing at her. Jack had helped her without asking anything in return. Could she do less? But the thought of voluntarily placing herself in the town's crosshairs again made her hands shake. As dusk fell, she made her choice, wrapping herself in her best shawl, the one without patches. Eliza walked the 2 miles to town. The streets were busier than usual, clusters of men talking in low, excited voices. She kept to the shadows, making her way to the saloon where Jack rented a room. She found him on the back stairs, cleaning a cut above his eyebrow. His knuckles were scraped raw. "You shouldn't be here," he said, not looking up. "Neither should you, apparently." She climbed the stairs, pulling a clean handkerchief from her pocket. "Let me see." He submitted to her ministrations with surprising meekness. Up close, she could see the exhaustion in the lines of his face, the weight he carried. His quest for justice was wearing him down, just as the town's cruelty had worn her. "What happened?" "Sheriff didn't appreciate me finding witnesses who saw Luke the night he died. Seems my brother was beaten pretty badly before he supposedly hanged himself. Hard to tie a noose with 2 broken hands." Eliza's breath caught. "Oh, Jack. Dr. Hendricks saw the body. Been drinking himself to death ever since, trying to forget. But he talked to me today. Told me Sheriff Riles and Mayor Blackwood were there that night, along with your late husband." The handkerchief slipped from Eliza's numb fingers. "Thomas was there?" "He tried to stop them, according to Hendricks. Said Luke was just a kid, didn't deserve what they were doing. They turned on him then. Threatened him. 2 weeks later, he was dead at the bottom of that gulch." The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. Thomas's fear in those final days, his desperate talk of leaving town, starting over somewhere new. He'd witnessed a murder and known his life was forfeit for it. "That's why," she whispered. "Why they've made my life hell. They think Thomas told me something." Jack's hand covered hers, warm and steady. "What did he tell you?" "Nothing. He came home drunk that last night, rambling about sin and judgment. I thought it was the whiskey talking. But he kept saying he was sorry, that he'd failed us both." Tears burned her eyes. "I was angry with him for drinking again. I sent him to sleep in the barn. If I'd listened—" "Stop." Jack's voice was firm. "His death wasn't your fault, any more than Luke's was mine." They sat in silence on the cold stairs, hands linked, sharing the weight of grief and guilt. Finally, Jack spoke again. "I found something else. Papers in the mayor's office, land deeds, mineral rights. They're forcing out anyone who won't sell, using whatever means necessary. Luke discovered their scheme, so they killed him. Thomas saw it happen, so he had to go too, and they've been tormenting me ever since, hoping I'd leave town." "Or die," Jack said grimly. "A widow alone, no family, no friends, who'd ask questions if you had an accident." The truth of it chilled her more than the winter wind. All those months of isolation, of systematic cruelty. It hadn't been random. It had been a campaign designed to break her. "You have to leave," she said urgently. "Tonight, they'll kill you too." "Probably." He didn't sound particularly concerned. "But I'm not going anywhere. Not until I get justice for Luke. And now for Thomas too. Jack, please." He turned to face her fully, and the intensity in his gray eyes stopped her words. "You've been standing alone against this town for a year, letting them grind you down, make you small. I watched it happen to Luke, watched him get smaller and more afraid until there was nothing left but despair. I won't watch it happen to you. I'm not your responsibility." "No," he agreed. "You're not, but you're—" He paused, seeming to search for words. "That first day, at the market, you were on the ground, covered in mud, the whole town laughing. But you got up. You gathered your things with dignity and walked away with your head high. Luke gave up. You didn't. That matters." Eliza felt tears spill over. When was the last time someone had seen strength in her rather than scandal? "I'm tired of being strong." "I know." His thumb brushed across her knuckles. "Maybe you don't have to be. Not alone, anyway." A door slammed below, making them both tense. Voices drifted up, men entering the saloon, already deep in their cups. One voice rose above the rest. Sheriff Riles, demanding to know where the meddling cowboy was hiding. "Go," Jack said urgently. "Out the back, through the alley. Don't let them see you." But Eliza found herself frozen, unwilling to abandon him. "Come with me. We can leave together, tonight. Start over somewhere they can't find us." For a moment, something flickered in his eyes. Temptation, perhaps, or longing. Then he shook his head. "I can't. Luke deserves justice. Thomas, too. And all the others they've hurt or will hurt if someone doesn't stop them. Then I'm staying too. Eliza, no." She stood, surprising herself with a firmness in her voice. "I've run long enough, hidden long enough. If you're making a stand, then so am I." The voices below grew louder. Boots on stairs. Jack rose swiftly, pulling her into the shadows of the landing. "Stubborn woman," he muttered, but there was admiration in it. Sheriff Riles appeared at the top of the stairs, flanked by 2 deputies. His mean eyes glittered with satisfaction when he spotted Jack. "There you are, Rourke. Been looking for you. Seems you've been spreading lies about good folks in this town." "Truth isn't lies," Jack said calmly. "Just inconvenient for murderers." Riles's face darkened. "Careful. Cowboy. Accidents happen. Your brother learned that the hard way. So you admit it was no suicide?" "I admit nothing." The sheriff's gaze shifted, landing on Eliza. His smile turned uglier. Well, the widow Harlow. Should have known you'd take up with this troublemaker. Birds of a feather. Leave her out of this." Jack stepped forward, placing himself between Eliza and the sheriff. "Protective, aren't we?" Riles laughed. An ugly sound. "Tell me, Rourke, she as accommodating with you as she was with half the men in town?" The slur hung in the air like poison. Eliza felt Jack tense, ready to launch himself at the sheriff. She caught his arm, holding him back. Violence would only give Riles the excuse he wanted. "Mrs. Harlow is a respectable widow," Jack said, his voice deadly quiet. "Any man who says otherwise is a liar and a coward." Fighting words. Riles's hand moved to his gun. "Maybe we should settle this like men. Byron!" The new voice came from behind the deputies. Mayor Blackwood climbed the stairs, his expensive suit impeccable despite the late hour. He was a handsome man in his 50s, silver-haired and smooth as oil. His eyes, cold as winter slate, took in the scene with calculation. "Sheriff, I hardly think gunplay is necessary." "Mr. Rourke was just leaving town." "Weren't you, sir?" "No," Jack said simply. "I wasn't." Blackwood's smile never wavered, but something dangerous flickered behind it. "I think you'll find you were tonight, in fact, unless you'd prefer to be leaving in a pine box like your brother. You admit to murdering Luke. I admit to being a practical man in a practical town. Your brother couldn't understand that some questions are better left unasked. I hope you're smarter." Jack took a step forward. "I understand plenty. I understand you killed a 19-year-old kid because he found out about your land grab scheme. I understand you killed Thomas Harlow for witnessing it. And I understand you'll keep killing until someone stops you." "Proof," Blackwood said softly. "Such an elusive thing. Whereas the proof of you accosting Mrs. Harlow on a dark stairway, forcing your attentions on a helpless widow? Well, that's right here for all to see." Eliza gasped. "That's a lie." "Is it?" Blackwood's smile widened. "A known troublemaker, alone with a woman of questionable reputation. Who would the good people of Mercy's Bend believe?" The trap was elegant in its simplicity. If Jack stayed, they'd hang him for assault. If he left, they'd win, either way. The truth about Luke and Thomas would die. "I'll go," Jack said quietly. "No." Eliza stepped out from behind him. "I won't let you." "Listen to me." He turned, gripping her shoulders gently. "This isn't over. I'll go tonight, but I'll be back. With federal marshals, with newspapermen, with whoever it takes to see justice done. They can run me out, but they can't hide what they've done forever." She saw the promise in his eyes, felt the determination in his grip, but she also saw what it cost him to walk away from his brother's memory, from his quest for justice, from her. "Take care of yourself," he said softly. "Use the blue kerchief if you need me. I'll find a way to come." Then he was walking down the stairs, past the smirking sheriff and cold-eyed mayor. Eliza stood frozen, watching him disappear into the night. The men's laughter followed him, ugly and triumphant. "As for you," Mayor Blackwood turned his attention to Eliza, "I suggest you think carefully about your position in this town. We've been patient with you, Mrs. Harlow, but patience has limits." The threat was clear. She met his gaze steadily, finding a reserve of courage she hadn't known existed. "My husband was a good man. He died trying to do right. I won't dishonor his memory by running." Something flickered in Blackwood's eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or a grudging respect. "Your funeral, madam, perhaps literally." After they left, Eliza stood alone on the landing, trembling but oddly exhilarated. For the first time since Thomas died, she'd stood up to them. She'd chosen a side, claimed an ally, declared herself something more than a victim. The cost might be her life. But as she walked home through the cold night, Eliza realized she'd rather die on her feet than live on her knees. Jack would come back. She believed that with bone-deep certainty. And when he did, she'd be ready to help him fight. The mountains loomed against the star-filled sky, eternal and indifferent to human struggles. But for the first time in a year, Eliza didn't feel small beneath their gaze. She felt part of something larger, a quest for justice that connected her to Jack, to Luke, even to Thomas. They'd tried to break her with isolation. Instead, they'd forged her into something harder, stronger, and they'd given her an ally whose steady presence had reminded her who she was beneath the fear and grief. "I'll be waiting," she whispered to the wind, hoping it would carry her words to wherever Jack rode through the darkness. "However long it takes, I'll be here." The blue kerchief waited in her barn, a promise and a lifeline. She wouldn't need it yet, not while she had strength to stand. But knowing it was there, knowing Jack would come if called, gave her the courage to face whatever the town threw at her next. She'd been the lonely widow long enough. Now she was something else, a woman with a purpose, a fighter in a cause that mattered. And when Jack Rourke returned with the law at his back, she'd stand beside him and see justice done for all the lost souls of Mercy's Bend. The weeks after Jack's departure stretched like pulled taffy, each day longer and harder than the last. November's bite turned vicious, and Eliza fought to keep her small homestead running with numb fingers and dwindling supplies. The townspeople's cruelty had sharpened to a keen edge. No one would sell her goods. Her chickens were poisoned one by one, and rocks shattered her windows in the night. But she endured, clinging to Jack's promise like a lifeline in a storm. Then came the night the barn burned. Eliza woke to the acrid smell of smoke and the terrified screaming of her last horse. By the time she stumbled outside, flames were already licking at the roof, orange tongues reaching greedily toward the star-filled sky. She ran for the water bucket, knowing it was futile but unable to simply watch. That's when she saw them, 3 figures silhouetted against the fire, watching her desperate efforts with satisfaction. Sheriff Riles raised a mock salute before they melted back into darkness. The barn collapsed just after she managed to free the horse. She stood in her nightgown, barefoot in the snow, watching months of Jack's careful work turn to ash. The blue kerchief was gone, burned with everything else. Her last connection to him, her promise of rescue, destroyed. Something inside Eliza broke then, but it wasn't her spirit. It was the last of her fear, crumbling away like burned timber. They wanted her gone. They'd have to do better than fire. The next morning, she walked to town with the soot still streaking her face. At the general store, she stood at the counter until Morrison had no choice but to acknowledge her. "I need supplies," she said clearly, "and I have money to pay." "We don't," he began. "You do now." She placed coins on the counter. Exact change for flour and beans. Unless you want everyone to know, you turn away paying customers while extending credit to men who can't cover their gambling debts. Morrison's face flushed. The store was full of other customers, all listening. After a long moment, he took her money and filled her order. It was a small victory, but Eliza savored it. That night brought the first real storm of winter. Snow fell in thick curtains, and wind howled like a living thing. Eliza huddled by her stove, wrapped in every blanket she owned, when she heard it, a sound that didn't belong to the storm. Someone was trying her door. She grabbed the shotgun Thomas had left, checking that it was loaded. The door shuddered under another impact. Then, through the wind, she heard a voice. "Eliza, it's me!" Her hands shook as she fumbled with the latch. Jack stumbled inside, bringing a swirl of snow and cold. He was pale as the storm itself. One arm pressed against his side where dark stains spread across his coat. "Jack!" She dropped the gun, reaching for him as he swayed. "You're hurt. Sheriff's men caught up with me near Laramie." His voice was rough with pain. Couldn't stay away. Heard about the barn." She helped him to a chair, her hands already working at his coat buttons. The wound was bad, a deep graze along his ribs that had bled freely. But no vital organs hit. "Thank God." "You shouldn't have come back," she said, heating water and tearing strips from a clean sheet. "Not like this, not alone. Couldn't get the marshals to listen. Not enough evidence." He winced as she cleaned the wound. "But I kept thinking, you alone here, them escalating. I couldn't stay away." His eyes met hers, and Eliza saw everything he wasn't saying. He'd ridden through a blizzard with a bullet wound because he couldn't bear the thought of her facing the town's malice alone. The tenderness of it nearly undid her. She worked in silence, cleaning and binding his wound with hands that had grown steady through necessity. When she finished, they sat close by the stove, sharing warmth and quiet companionship. "I'm sorry about the barn," he said eventually. "I know how hard we worked on it. It's just wood and nails." She surprised herself with how much she meant it. "You're here. That's what matters." He reached out, his fingers brushing a streak of soot she'd missed on her cheek. The touch was feather-light, but it sent warmth spreading through her chest. "Eliza, I know," she whispered. "I know we can't. I know it's dangerous and foolish, and I don't care anymore." His hand cupped her face, thumb tracing her cheekbone. "I've spent weeks trying to convince myself to stay away, to protect you by keeping distance. But they hurt you anyway, and I wasn't here." The anguish in his voice broke her heart. "This isn't your fault, isn't it? I stirred them up and then left you to face the consequences." His other hand found hers, holding tight. "I've been so focused on justice for the dead that I nearly let them destroy the living. Destroy you." "I'm still here," she said softly. "Singed around the edges, maybe, but still standing." He laughed, a sound caught between humor and pain. "Strongest woman I've ever known, and the most beautiful." The words hung between them like suspended snowflakes. Eliza felt her breath catch. No one had called her beautiful since Thomas's death. She'd forgotten she could be anything but the widow, the pariah, the target. "Jack." But she didn't know how to finish. How to say that he'd given her back pieces of herself she'd thought lost forever. How to explain that his presence made her feel human again, worthy of kindness and desire and love. So instead, she leaned forward and kissed him. It was tentative at first, a question more than a statement. He went very still, and for a moment she feared she'd misunderstood. Then his hand slid into her hair, and he was kissing her back with a desperate tenderness that made her ache. When they broke apart, both breathing unsteadily, Jack rested his forehead against hers. "We shouldn't. You've been through enough scandal. I don't care about scandal." The truth of it rang through her like a bell. "They've taken everything else. They won't take this too." He pulled back to study her face. Whatever he saw there must have convinced him, because the last of his resistance crumbled. This time when he kissed her, it was deeper, hungrier. Months of loneliness and fear transformed into something fierce and bright between them. Eliza's hands found the buttons of his shirt, careful of his bandages. She traced the other scars she found there, a map of hard living carved into skin and muscle. He shivered under her touch, whispering her name like a prayer. "Are you sure?" he asked when she stood, drawing him toward her small bedroom. Instead of answering with words, she let her shawl drop to the floor. The heat in his eyes made her feel powerful, desired, alive. She'd been a ghost haunting her own life for so long. Tonight, she wanted to remember what it meant to inhabit her body fully. They came together with desperate gentleness, hands and mouths exploring with wonder. Jack whispered endearments against her skin. How beautiful she was, how strong, how precious. Each word helped heal something broken inside her. When he traced the line of her spine with reverent fingers, when he kissed the hollow of her throat, when he held her like she might shatter or disappear, Eliza felt herself coming back together, piece by piece. This wasn't just desire, though desire burned bright between them. This was recognition. Two damaged souls seeing each other clearly and choosing connection despite the danger. Later, they lay entwined beneath her quilts while the storm raged outside. Jack's arm curved protectively around her, and she traced lazy patterns on his chest, careful of his bandages. "What happens now?" she asked quietly. "I don't know," he admitted. "But I'm not leaving again, not unless you come with me. And abandon the fight? There are other ways to fight. We could go to the newspapers in Cheyenne, bring federal attention to what's happening here, build a case from the outside." It was tempting. To leave Mercy's Bend behind, start fresh somewhere no one knew their names or their ghosts. But Eliza thought of Thomas, of Luke, of all the others ground beneath Blackwood's boot. "Not yet," she said. "Not until we finish what you started, what they both died trying to expose." Jack's arm tightened around her. "Then we finish it together. No more facing them alone. Together." She agreed and sealed it with a kiss. Outside, the blizzard howled its fury. But inside Eliza's small house, warmth bloomed, not just from the stove or their shared body heat, but from something deeper, the warmth of being truly seen, truly valued, truly loved. She knew morning would bring new dangers. Sheriff Riles wouldn't stop until one of them was dead. Mayor Blackwood had too much to lose to let them survive. The whole town would turn against them with renewed venom when they learned Jack had returned. But tonight, wrapped in Jack's arms, Eliza felt ready for whatever came. They'd branded her a shameless woman. Then she'd be shameless in her courage. They'd named her a threat to their order. Then she'd threaten until their corruption crumbled. "I'll never let them hurt you again," Jack murmured against her hair, echoing his earlier promise. "We'll protect each other," she corrected softly. "That's what partners do." He smiled against her temple. Partners. I like the sound of that. As sleep finally claimed them, the storm began to ease. By dawn, the world would be transformed, blanketed in pristine white that hid all sins and secrets. But beneath that deceptive purity, Eliza and Jack would be waiting, ready to dig up the truth and drag it into the light. They'd found each other in the darkness, two lonely souls refusing to break. Now, together, they'd become something the corrupt men of Mercy's Bend had never expected. A force for justice, bound by love and tempered by shared pain. The fight ahead would be brutal. But Eliza had learned she was stronger than she'd ever imagined. And with Jack beside her, she was ready to prove that sometimes. The greatest revenge against cruelty was simply refusing to stop living, loving, and fighting for what's right. The widow Harlow was dead. In her place stood Eliza, partner, lover, warrior, and she would not yield. Dawn broke cold and clear after the storm, painting the world in shades of silver and blue. Eliza woke to find Jack already dressed, standing watch at the frost-covered window. The tender intimacy of the night felt both precious and precarious in the harsh morning light. "They'll know I'm here soon enough," he said without turning. "My horse left tracks." She rose, wrapping a blanket around herself, and joined him at the window. Fresh footprints circled her house. Someone had been prowling while they slept. "They already know." His jaw tightened. Then we need to move fast. There's something I didn't tell you last night. He turned to face her, pulling a worn leather journal from his coat. Luke hid this before he died. I found it in his things. It's all here, names, dates, amounts. Every dirty deal Blackwood and his cronies made. Eliza took the journal with trembling hands, scanning pages of careful notes in Luke's young handwriting. Land seized through false foreclosures. Mining claims stolen. Even a judge bought and paid for. This is enough to destroy them all, if we can get it to the right people. Jack's expression was grim. The sheriff will come for us today. We need to be ready. They spent the morning preparing, hiding the journal, loading weapons, barricading windows. As they worked side by side, Eliza felt the connection between them deepen. Every brush of hands, every shared glance, strengthened the bond forged in darkness. "Do you regret it?" Jack asked suddenly as they reinforced the door. Last night, she met his eyes steadily. "The only thing I regret is that we didn't have more time." He caught her hand, bringing it to his lips. "When this is over, we'll have all the time in the world. I promise you that." Before she could respond, hoofbeats thundered up the path. Sheriff Riles had arrived with 6 deputies, their faces hard with violent intent. Jack pushed Eliza behind him, checking his rifle. "Jack Rourke," Riles shouted. "You're under arrest for assault, theft, and corruption of a virtuous woman." Despite everything, Eliza almost laughed at that last charge. Virtuous woman, after they'd spent a year destroying any claim she had to virtue. "Send Eliza out," Riles continued. "She doesn't have to die with you. Rourke, we'll see she's treated merciful-like." "His mercy involves a shallow grave," Jack muttered. Then louder, "You want us. You'll have to come get us." The first shot shattered the kitchen window. Eliza dropped low, crawling to where Thomas's shotgun waited. The lessons her father had taught her long ago came flooding back. Breathe steady, aim true, don't waste shells. For an hour, they held the house. Jack was an excellent shot, and desperation made Eliza deadly accurate. 2 deputies fell wounded, and the others grew cautious. But ammunition wouldn't last forever, and Riles had time on his side. "Getting warm in there yet?" the sheriff taunted. Smoke was beginning to seep through the walls. They'd set fire to the lean-to attached to the kitchen. Soon the whole house would burn. "The root cellar," Eliza said urgently. "There's a tunnel Thomas dug, leads to the old mine shaft." Jack's eyes widened. "You never mentioned. I never trusted anyone enough." She grabbed his hand. "But I trust you." They retreated as flames began licking through the kitchen wall. The root cellar was accessed through a trap door in the bedroom floor. As they climbed down, Eliza looked back once at the home she'd fought so hard to keep. Strange how easy it was to let go when she had something more precious to protect. The tunnel was narrow, earthen, braced with old timbers. They crawled through darkness, guided by touch and faith. Behind them, they could hear the house collapsing, Riles's men shouting in frustration. They emerged in the abandoned mine shaft just as the sun reached its zenith. Jack helped Eliza up, both of them filthy and coughing from smoke. They'd escaped, but barely. "They'll track us," Jack said, scanning the barren landscape. "We need to— No more running." Eliza's voice was steel. "It's time to end this." She explained her plan as they made their way toward town, keeping to the rocky ground that wouldn't show tracks. It was audacious, possibly suicidal, but Jack listened with growing admiration. "You're sure about this?" he asked as the church steeple came into view. "They took everything from me, my husband, my home, my reputation, but they also freed me." She looked at him, fierce and beautiful despite the soot and dirt. "I have nothing left to lose and everything to gain." The monthly town meeting was in full swing when they entered through the church's back door. Mayor Blackwood stood at the pulpit, holding forth about progress and prosperity. His words died as Eliza strode down the aisle, Jack flanking her with rifle ready. "Murderers," Eliza said, her voice carrying to every corner. "That's what you're harboring? Mayor Blackwood, Sheriff Riles, Judge Carpenter, they killed Luke Rourke and my husband Thomas. The congregation erupted in shocked murmurs. Blackwood's face went white with rage. "Sheriff, arrest these criminals!" But Riles and his wounded deputies hadn't returned from the burning homestead yet. Blackwood was exposed, vulnerable. Thomas saw them beat Luke Rourke to death. Eliza continued, pulling out the journal. "It's all here, written in Luke's own hand. Every crime, every stolen claim, every life destroyed for greed." She began reading aloud. Names, dates, details. With each revelation, the crowd grew more restless. These weren't strangers she was accusing, but their neighbors, their leaders. Some faces showed disbelief, but others began to show recognition, pieces falling into place. "Lies," Blackwood snarled. "The ravings of a disturbed woman and her outlaw paramour." "Then let's ask Dr. Hendricks," Jack said calmly. "Ask him what condition Luke's body was in. Ask him who was there that night." All eyes turned to the doctor, slumped in a back pew. The elderly man rose shakily, his face a map of guilt and alcohol. "It's true," he said hoarsely. "God help me, it's all true. They beat that boy to death, and I signed the death certificate saying suicide. They threatened my granddaughter if I didn't. The dam broke. Others began speaking up about land stolen, threats made, loved ones who died in suspicious circumstances." The Methodist minister's wife revealed how her husband had been run out of town for asking too many questions. The blacksmith told of being forced to shoe horses for rustlers on Blackwood's orders. "Enough!" Blackwood pulled a derringer from his vest, aiming at Eliza. "You poisonous witch! You've destroyed everything!" Time slowed. Eliza saw the barrel swing toward her, saw Jack moving to shield her, saw death coming dressed in righteous fury. Then a shot rang out, but not from Blackwood's gun. The mayor crumpled, clutching his shoulder. In the doorway stood Sheriff Riles, his own gun smoking. "That's enough, Byron," Riles said tiredly. "It's over." For a moment, Eliza thought the sheriff had switched sides. Then she saw his face, not repentant, just pragmatic, a survivor cutting his losses. "You're all fools if you believe them." Riles addressed the crowd. "But I know when a game's played out, I'll be moving on." He backed out of the church, and no one tried to stop him. They were too stunned by the cascade of revelations, the sudden crumbling of their town's power structure. In the chaos that followed, Jack kept Eliza close. Citizens shouted for justice, for arrests, for vengeance. But she felt strangely calm. They'd done it. The truth was out, spreading like wildfire through the crowd. "You did it," Jack murmured in her ear. "You brought them down." "We did it," she corrected. "Together." Judge Carpenter tried to slip out but was detained by angry townspeople. Others who'd participated in the corruption found themselves surrounded, forced to answer for their crimes, and at the center of it all, bleeding and defeated, Mayor Blackwood glared at Eliza with pure hatred. "You've destroyed this town," he spat. "Torn it apart. Are you satisfied?" Eliza looked around at the chaos, the anger, the pain of truth exposed. Then she looked at Jack, steady beside her, and thought of Thomas and Luke, whose deaths would finally have justice. "Yes," she said simply. "I am." The aftermath was messy, complicated. Federal marshals did arrive eventually. Drawn by the scandal, trials were held. Some men went to prison, others fled like Riles. The town of Mercy's Bend would take years to heal, to rebuild trust and leadership. But standing in that church, surrounded by the wreckage of lies, Eliza felt something she hadn't experienced in over a year. Freedom. The fear that had haunted her every step was gone. The shame they'd tried to heap on her had burned away. She was no longer the widow Harlow, trapped by tragedy and others' cruelty. She was simply Eliza, a woman who'd fought back and won. Jack's hand found hers, warm and sure. "What now?" he asked. She thought of her burned homes, her ruined reputation, her uncertain future. Then she smiled, feeling lighter than air. "Now we live, really live, without fear, without shame, without letting anyone else decide our worth." He smiled back, and in his eyes she saw their future, difficult perhaps, but theirs to shape. They'd found each other in darkness and emerged into light, scarred but not broken, tested but not defeated. The corrupt men of Mercy's Bend had thought her just a lonely widow, easily crushed. They'd learned too late that loneliness could forge strength, that cruelty could spark courage, and that two people united by love and justice were more powerful than all their schemes. As they walked out of the church together, Eliza felt the ghost of Thomas smile, felt Luke Rourke's spirit find peace. Justice had come to Mercy's Bend at last, carried on the shoulders of a widow who'd refused to break and a cowboy who'd remembered how to love. The December sun hung low over the mountains as Eliza and Jack worked side by side, clearing the charred remains of her old home. 2 weeks had passed since the confrontation at the church, and Mercy's Bend was slowly finding its footing under new leadership. The minister, Reverend Wallace, had stepped in as temporary mayor, bringing a measure of calm to the chaos. "We could rebuild on the same spot," Jack suggested, pausing to wipe sweat from his brow despite the winter chill. "Start fresh." Eliza shook her head, gazing at the land that had held so much pain. "No, this place belongs to the past now." She pointed toward a rise overlooking the valley. "There, Thomas always said it was the prettiest spot on the property." They'd been living in the abandoned foreman's cabin on the edge of town while deciding their future. Some folks still whispered when Eliza passed, but without Blackwood's machinery of hate driving them, most had retreated into embarrassed silence. A few had even offered awkward apologies, which she accepted with quiet grace. As they worked, a rider approached. Samuel Morrison from the general store. Jack tensed, hand moving toward his rifle, but the man raised empty hands. "Mrs. Harlow and Mr. Rourke." Morrison dismounted, clearly uncomfortable. "I've come to, that is, the town council has met, and we want to make things right." "Bit late for that," Jack said coolly. Morrison flushed but continued. "We know. Can't undo what's been done. But Blackwood's assets have been seized, and we've voted to compensate those he wronged. There's money set aside for you, Mrs. Harlow, enough to rebuild and then some." Eliza studied him for a long moment. "And what about the others? The families run off their land, the claims stolen. We're tracking them down, making restitution where we can." Morrison pulled out an envelope. "This is yours by right. Please." After he left, Eliza stood holding the envelope, unexpectedly moved. It wasn't just about the money. It was acknowledgement, finally, that she'd been wronged. "You all right?" Jack asked softly. "I think so." She leaned into his solid warmth. "It's strange. For so long, all I wanted was for them to see me as human again. Now that some do, I don't know what to do with it." "You do what you've always done," he said, pressing a kiss to her temple. "You survive. You build. You live." That evening, they sat by the fire in the little cabin, planning their future with the enthusiasm of children. A proper house with a big kitchen and windows facing the mountains. A barn for horses. Jack wanted to raise and train them. A garden where Eliza could grow vegetables and the flowers she'd always loved but never had time for. "We'll need help with the building," Jack mused. "Might be able to hire some men from town." A knock interrupted him. They exchanged wary glances before Jack answered. Gun in hand, but instead of trouble, they found Clara Hayes, the blacksmith's daughter, holding a covered dish. "Ma sent this," the girl said shyly. "Venison stew. She says—" Clara took a breath. "She says she's sorry. We all are. The way we treated you wasn't Christian." Behind Clara stood others, the baker's wife with fresh bread, old Mr. Peterson with a side of bacon, even Mrs. Henderson looking supremely uncomfortable with a pie. One by one, the people who'd shunned Eliza for over a year stood at her door with offerings. "We were cowards," Mrs. Henderson said stiffly, "afraid to stand against the mayor and sheriff. But that's no excuse for cruelty." Eliza felt Jack's hand on her back, steady and supportive. "Thank you," she managed. "All of you, please, come in." It was awkward at first. The kitchen cramped with people who'd crossed streets to avoid her. But gradually, as they shared food and tentative conversation, something shifted. These weren't friends, might never be, but they were neighbors trying to find their way back to decency. After they'd gone, Eliza sat stunned by the sudden reversal. "I don't know how to feel about this." "You don't have to forgive them," Jack said carefully. "Not unless you want to." "It's not about forgiveness." She struggled to find words. "It's about moving forward. They were afraid, just like I was. Blackwood used that fear to control us all. You stopped being afraid first. That matters." "No," she corrected. "You helped me stop being afraid. That's what matters." Christmas came with unprecedented warmth for December, the snow melting into muddy streams. Eliza and Jack had moved into their half-finished house, camping in the completed rooms while work continued. On Christmas Eve, they stood together watching the sunset paint the mountains purple and gold. "I have something for you," Jack said, producing a small wrapped package. Inside was a silver locket, simple but beautiful. "It was my mother's," he explained. "One of the few things I kept. I want you to have it." Eliza's throat tightened. "Jack, I can't." "You can." He took the locket, fastening it around her neck. "Ma would have loved you. Would have loved how strong you are. How you don't quit even when the whole world's against you." She touched the warm metal where it rested against her chest. "I have something for you, too." She led him to the barn, where a beautiful black mare stood in a newly built stall. "Her name's Midnight. The horse dealer owed Thomas money. He brought her his payment when he heard what happened." Jack's face lit up like a boy's. "She's perfect." He ran appreciative hands over the mare's lines. "Good bloodlines. Strong chest. She'll throw fine foals." "That's what I thought." Eliza smiled. "The start of your horse operation." He turned to her then, something intense in his gray eyes. "Our operation. Everything I have is yours, Eliza. Everything I am." The words hung between them, weighted with meaning. They'd been living as partners, working side by side, sharing a bed and a future, but neither had put words to what they were building together. "Is that a proposal, Jack Rourke?" she asked softly. He moved closer, cupping her face in work-roughened hands. "I suppose it is. Marry me, Eliza. Not because we need to for propriety or because the town expects it, but because I love you and can't imagine a life without you in it." "We've known each other such a short time," she said, though her heart was already saying yes. "I've known you my whole life," he countered. "Just took me a while to find you." She kissed him then, pouring all her love and hope into it. When they broke apart, both breathless, she whispered, "Yes, yes to marriage, to partnership, to whatever comes next. Yes to you, Jack." They were married on New Year's Day in the little church where truth had finally conquered lies. Reverend Wallace performed the ceremony, his kind face beaming. The church was fuller than expected, not just the few friends they'd made, but others coming to witness something they'd thought impossible: Eliza Harlow's happiness. She wore a simple blue dress Clara's mother had helped her make. Jack stood tall in his Sunday best, looking at her like she'd hung the moon. When Wallace asked if anyone objected, the silence was profound. The town that had once conspired against her now stood witness to her joy. "You may kiss your bride," Wallace announced, and Jack did so thoroughly, earning scattered applause and a few good-natured whistles. The reception was held at the newly reopened hotel, paid for by the town council as a wedding gift. It was modest but genuine. People who'd learned hard lessons trying to start fresh. Even Dr. Hendricks attended, sober for the first time in months, quietly thanking Eliza for forcing the truth into the light. As the evening wound down, Jack and Eliza slipped away to their half-built home on the rise. Inside, candles created warm pools of light, and a fire crackled in the hearth. Their bedroom was finished now, complete with a brass bed Jack had ordered from Denver. "No regrets?" Jack asked as they stood together, still in their wedding clothes. "None," Eliza said firmly. For the first time in my life, I'm exactly where I want to be. He spun her slowly, dancing to music only they could hear. Mrs. Rourke, he murmured. I like the sound of that. So do I. She rested her head against his chest, feeling his heartbeat strong and steady. Though I was getting used to being notorious, the widow Harlow had such a dramatic ring to it. You'll always be dramatic to me, he teased. The woman who brought down a corrupt regime with nothing but truth and courage. And a very stubborn cowboy who wouldn't let me give up. That too. They moved together in the candlelight. Two souls who'd found each other in the darkness and chosen to build something beautiful from the ashes of their pain. Outside, snow began to fall again, blanketing the world in pristine white. But inside was warmth and love and the promise of all the years to come. Later, as they lay entwined in their new bed, Eliza traced the scars on Jack's chest, the old ones from his rough life, the new one from defending her. We've both been marked by this world, she said softly, but not broken by it, he replied, catching her hand and kissing her fingers. Never broken? No, she agreed. Bent maybe, but not broken, and stronger at the mended places. They made love with the tender passion of new spouses and the deeper intimacy of souls who'd been tested together. Every touch was a promise, every whispered endearment a vow more binding than those spoken in church. As dawn approached, they stood wrapped in a blanket at the window, watching the sun rise over their snow-covered land. The mountains stood eternal, indifferent to human struggles, but no longer oppressive. They were simply beautiful, part of the landscape of home. What are you thinking? Jack asked, feeling her quiet contemplation. About Thomas, she said honestly. Hoping he knows justice was done, hoping he's at peace. I think he is. Luke, too. Jack pulled her closer. They brought us together in a way. Their tragedy led to our happiness. Then we honor them by living well, Eliza said firmly. By building something good here, something that lasts. Starting with that barn, can't run a horse operation without a proper barn. She laughed, the sound bright in the morning air. Always practical. Someone has to be. You'd spend all day dreaming about flower gardens and fancy curtains. And you'd have us living in a stable if I let you. They bickered gently, the comfortable disagreement of people secure in their love. As the sun climbed higher, neighbors began arriving to help with the building, a barn raising in the old tradition. Community coming together to support their own. Watching the walls go up, surrounded by the sounds of construction and conversation. Eliza felt the last of her bitterness dissolve. This was what Blackwood and his kind had tried to steal. Not just property or money, but connection, belonging. The simple human kindness that made life bearable in a hard land. She'd been the lonely widow for so long. She'd almost forgotten any other way to be. But now she was Eliza Rourke, wife, neighbor, survivor, thriver. The town that had tried to break her was helping build her future. The man who'd come seeking vengeance had found love instead. Thank you, she whispered to the wind, to Thomas, to God, to whatever force had brought Jack to that muddy market square when she needed him most. Then she rolled up her sleeves and joined the work, ready to build not just a barn but a life worth living. The lonely widow was gone forever. In her place stood a woman who'd learned that sometimes the greatest revenge is happiness, and the strongest foundation is love. Spring came late that year, but when it arrived, it transformed the valley into a carpet of wildflowers. Eliza stood in her flourishing garden, hands deep in rich soil, when she heard the church bell tolling frantically, not the measured pace of Sunday service or the solemn ring of death, but the wild clanging that meant danger. Jack appeared from the barn, his face tight with concern. Fire, he said, pointing to the black smoke rising from the eastern edge of town. Looks like the timber yard. They joined the stream of people rushing toward the flames. The drought of recent weeks had left everything tinder dry, and the fire was spreading fast, jumping from the timber yard to nearby buildings. Already, 2 houses were ablaze. "Form a bucket line," Reverend Wallace shouted, trying to organize the chaos. But the nearest water source was the creek, too far away to be effective. Eliza grabbed Jack's arm. The old irrigation ditches. Thomas helped dig them years ago. They run from the mountain stream through the Hendricks property. Understanding flashed in his eyes. But they've been dammed up for years. Then we'll undam them. Within minutes, Jack had gathered men with shovels and picks. While the bucket brigade fought a losing battle against the flames, they raced to the abandoned ditches. The work was brutal, shifting rocks and years of debris. But desperation lent them strength. "There!" old Peterson shouted as water began to trickle, then flow. "She's running!" The water wasn't enough to douse the fire completely, but it slowed the spread, giving the bucket brigade a fighting chance. Hours later, exhausted and smoke-blackened, the townspeople stood among the ruins of 6 buildings but celebrated that they'd saved the rest. Quick thinking, "Mrs. Rourke." "Doctor," Hendricks said, his weathered face grateful. "You saved the town." "We all did," Eliza corrected, but she felt a warm glow at the respect in their eyes. She was no longer an outsider but a vital part of the community. In the days that followed, rebuilding began immediately. Jack organized work crews while Eliza coordinated food for the workers and temporary shelter for those who'd lost homes. Their house on the rise became an unofficial headquarters, people coming and going with supplies and plans. One evening, as Eliza served coffee to a planning committee in her kitchen, she overheard Mrs. Henderson speaking to another woman. "I was wrong about her, dead wrong. She's got more Christian charity in her little finger than I've shown in years." The words shouldn't have mattered after everything, but they did. Each small acceptance, each gesture of inclusion, helped heal wounds she'd thought permanent. As summer reached its peak, Jack's horse operation was thriving. He'd acquired 3 mares and a magnificent stallion, and word of his training skills had spread. Men came from neighboring towns to buy horses or have theirs gentled. And Eliza kept the books, discovering a head for figures she'd never suspected. One hot afternoon, she was reconciling accounts when she heard a commotion outside. Through the window, she saw Jack working with a particularly difficult Mustang, the horse rearing and striking. Her heart clenched as Jack narrowly avoided flailing hooves, unable to watch from afar. She walked to the corral. Jack had the Mustang on a long lead, speaking low and constant, his movements calm despite the danger. Gradually, the horse's panic eased, wild eyes beginning to show curiosity rather than fear. "That's it," Jack murmured. "No one's going to hurt you here. You're safe now." Eliza smiled, remembering another frightened creature he'd gentled with patience and kindness. When he finally noticed her watching, his answering smile was bright with shared memory. "He reminds me of someone I know," Jack called. "All fury and fear on the outside, pure gold underneath." "Flatterer," she called back, but her cheeks warmed. That evening, as they sat on their completed porch watching the sunset, Jack grew thoughtful. "I've been thinking about Luke lately. His birthday's next week. He would have been 21. Eliza took his hand. They'd visited Luke's grave together, laid flowers and made peace. But she knew the grief still caught Jack sometimes, sharp and unexpected. "We could do something to mark it," she suggested. "Something Luke would have liked. He always wanted to help kids who had it rough. Grew up hard ourselves. Our PA wasn't kind. Luke used to say when he made good, he'd help other boys avoid that." "The old Blackwood house is sitting empty," Eliza said slowly. "The town took it for back taxes. What if we made it into something useful? A school, maybe. Or a home for boys who need a safe place." Jack turned to look at her, something wondering in his expression. "You'd do that after everything this town put you through? Not for the town, for Luke, for you." She squeezed his hand. "And maybe a little for the woman I'm becoming? She seems to have a forgiving heart." They brought the proposal to the town council the following week. There was initial resistance. Blackwood's house held bad memories, but Reverend Wallace supported them strongly. "Redemption," he said firmly. "That's what we're about here, taking something used for evil and turning it to good." The vote was unanimous. The work of transformation began immediately. The gaudy mansion became a haven, its many rooms converted to dormitories and classrooms. Eliza threw herself into the project, organizing donations, recruiting teachers, setting up a library with books she'd collected. "You're glowing," Jack told her one evening as she pored over plans for the garden. "Haven't seen you this excited about anything before. It feels right," she said simply, like something I was meant to do. The Luke Rourke Home for Boys opened in early September, with 5 residents aged 8 to 15. They were rough boys, suspicious and defensive, much like the Mustang Jack had gentled, but patient kindness worked on humans too, and slowly they began to trust. Eliza found herself especially drawn to the youngest, a boy named Timothy who'd been found living in an abandoned mine shaft. He rarely spoke, flinching from sudden movements, but he followed her around the garden like a shadow. "He reminds me of myself at that age," Jack said quietly one day, watching Timothy help Eliza harvest vegetables, waiting for the next blow, not believing kindness could be real. "It's real now," Eliza said firmly, "for him and all of them." As autumn painted the mountains gold and scarlet, life settled into new rhythms. Jack's horses, Eliza's gardens, the boys' home, and their own partnership all flourished with tending and time. The town that had once seemed so cruel now felt like community, imperfect but trying. One October evening, a year to the day since Jack had first helped her at the market, Eliza felt strangely restless. She stood at the window watching storm clouds gather, one hand pressed to her belly. "You all right?" Jack asked, looking up from the harness he was mending. "Yes, just remembering. This time last year, I thought my life was over. Now..." She turned to face him. "Now I have so much I sometimes fear it will be taken away." He set aside his work and came to her, wrapping strong arms around her from behind. "That's the fear talking, the old fear they put in you. But look at what we've built. It's solid, real. No one can take it from us now." She leaned back against his warmth. "There's something else. Something I need to tell you." He tensed slightly. "What is it?" She took his hand, placing it on her still flat belly. No, I know. We're going to have a baby." For a moment, he went absolutely still. Then he spun her around, his face alight with joy and wonder. "A baby? You're sure?" "As sure as a woman can be. I've suspected for weeks, but I wanted to be certain before." She was cut off by his kiss, deep and reverent. "A baby," he repeated when they broke apart, his hands framing her face. "Our baby. Eliza, I don't have words." "Are you happy?" "Happy?" He laughed, the sound rich with emotion. Lord, Eliza, I'm everything. Terrified, amazed, grateful. I never thought I'd have this. A wife, a home, a family." "You deserve all of it," she said softly. "We both do." That night, the storm broke with magnificent fury. Lightning split the sky while thunder shook their sturdy house. But inside was warmth and safety and joy too large for words. They made love with new tenderness, aware of the life growing between them, the future taking shape. "I want to name him Luke if it's a boy," Jack said later, his hand splayed protectively over her belly. "And if it's a girl?" He considered. "Hope, because that's what you gave me back." Eliza smiled against his chest. "Hope Rourke, I like it." As they drifted toward sleep, she thought about the journey that had brought them here, the lonely widow, abandoned by her community, the grieving brother, seeking justice. They'd found each other in darkness and built a life filled with light. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. The boys' home needed constant attention. The horse operation was expanding faster than expected, and now a baby would add beautiful chaos to their ordered life. But tonight, wrapped in her husband's arms with new life growing inside her, Eliza felt the deep contentment of someone who'd found her place. She'd been tested by fire, shaped by cruelty and kindness alike. She'd learned that rock bottom could become foundation, that love could grow in the most unlikely ground. "I love you," she whispered into the storm-loud darkness. "And I love you," Jack replied. "Both of you." Outside, lightning illuminated the mountains, revealing their eternal strength. Inside, two people who'd refused to let tragedy define them held tight to each other and the future they'd carved from hope and determination. The lonely widow was gone, transformed into something stronger and infinitely more beautiful. A woman who'd learned that sometimes the best revenge against cruelty is a life well lived, a heart well loved, and a future bright with possibility. The storm passed, leaving the air clean and new, and in the house on the rise, where love had conquered fear and truth had defeated lies, the Rourke slept peacefully, ready for whatever tomorrow might bring. 3 years had passed since that fire brought the town together. Mercy's Bend had transformed from a place of secrets and cruelty into a community that, while imperfect, tried to care for its own. The mountains still stood eternal against the Wyoming sky, but now they seemed to shelter rather than loom. Eliza sat on the porch of their completed home, watching 2-year-old Hope toddle after butterflies in the garden. Her daughter had Jack's gray eyes and her own determined chin, a combination that promised interesting times ahead. In her arms, baby Thomas Luke Rourke, born just 6 weeks ago, slept peacefully. "Mama, look," Hope cried, pointing at a particularly brilliant monarch. "Pretty, very pretty, sweetheart, but gentle. Remember, we don't hurt beautiful things." The sound of approaching horses drew her attention. Jack was returning from town with Timothy, now 15, and Jack's steadiest hand with the horses. The boy who'd once flinched from every touch had grown into a confident young man, talking of starting his own ranch someday. "Letter from Denver," Jack called, swinging down from midnight. The mare was graying around the muzzle now, but still his favorite mount. "From Sarah Morrison." Eliza smiled. The general store owner's daughter had gone east for teaching college and wrote regularly with news of the wider world. She opened the letter while Jack scooped up Hope, tossing her in the air to squeals of delight. "She's coming home for Christmas," Eliza announced, "and she's bringing someone special, a doctor she met at college." "Morrison will be over the moon," Jack said, settling Hope on his shoulders. "His little girl bringing home an educated man." They walked together toward the house, a family portrait of quiet contentment. Inside, the home they'd built reflected their life-sturdy furniture Jack had made. Curtains Eliza had sewn, children's toys scattered about, books everywhere. It was lived in, warm, welcoming. That evening, after the children were asleep, they sat by the fire as had become their custom. Jack was sketching plans for a new barn, while Eliza worked on the account books for the boys' home. They'd expanded to housing 12 boys now, with 2 full-time teachers and a cook. "Timothy wants to talk to you about something," Jack said without looking up. "Boy's got it in his head to court the minister's daughter. Emma Wallace, she's a sweet girl. They'd suit well." "That's what I thought. But he's nervous about approaching her father. Wants your advice on proper courtship." Eliza smiled. "I'll talk to him, though I'm not sure I'm the best person to advise on proper courtship. Ours was rather unconventional." "Best kind," Jack said, catching her hand and kissing it. "Forged in fire, tested by trials, we earned our happiness." A knock at the door interrupted them. Jack answered to find Dr. Hendricks, looking more fragile than ever but still making his rounds. "Sorry to disturb, but there's a woman at my office. She's in a bad way, traveled alone from Cheyenne, looking for you specifically. Mrs. Rourke." Eliza's brow furrowed. "For me? Who is she?" "Won't give her name, just keep saying she needs to see the woman who stood up to Mayor Blackwood." Within minutes, they were at the doctor's office. The woman huddled on the examination table was perhaps 30, her face bearing the telltale marks of harsh treatment. Her clothes were decent but travel-worn, and her eyes held a familiar desperation. "You're Eliza Rourke?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. "I am, and you're safe here. What's your name?" Margaret Stanton. I heard what you did here, how you fought back when everyone was against you." Tears started falling. "My husband, he's like your mayor was. Controls the whole town. Owns the sheriff. But he's worse at home. I tried to leave, but she didn't need to finish. Eliza saw her own past reflected in this woman's bruises and fear. You're safe now, Eliza repeated firmly. We'll help you. I don't have anywhere to go. No family, no money. He took it all. Then you'll stay with us, Jack said quietly. He'd been standing by the door, but now stepped forward. We've got room, and Eliza could use help with the little ones. Margaret looked between them, hope and suspicion warring in her eyes. Why would you help a stranger? Because someone helped me once. Eliza said, when I had nowhere to turn, when the whole world seemed set on crushing me, one person showed me kindness. It saved my life. They brought Margaret home, settling her in the spare room. Over the following days, her story emerged in pieces. A marriage that had turned cruel. A husband who used his wealth and position to trap her. A final beating that had given her the desperation to run. I keep expecting him to show up, Margaret confided one morning, helping Eliza with the washing. To drag me back. If he tries, he'll face more than just me. Eliza assured her. This town doesn't tolerate bullies anymore. We learned that lesson hard. As autumn deepened, Margaret began to bloom like a flower after drought. She was wonderful with the children, had a gift for sewing that brought in extra income, and slowly began to smile again. The boys at the home adopted her as another mother figure, protective of her gentle nature. One evening, Eliza found her sitting on the porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains. I've been thinking, Margaret said slowly, about what you did, standing up in that church, telling the truth even though they could have killed you for it. Where did you find the courage? Eliza settled beside her, baby Thomas in her arms. I'm not sure it was courage, more like I'd reached a point where living in fear was worse than dying free, and I wasn't alone. That made all the difference. I want to go back, Margaret said suddenly, to testify against him. There are other women, I know there are. If I speak up, maybe they will too. That's dangerous. So was what you did, but look what came from it. She gestured at the peaceful scene. Jack teaching young boys to gentle horses, Hope picking flowers, the town below settling into evening calm. Maybe my speaking up could help others find this kind of peace. Eliza reached over and squeezed her hand. Then we'll help you. Whatever you need. The first snow came early that year, blanketing the valley in pristine white. The annual Thanksgiving celebration at the church was larger than ever, families crowding in to share food and fellowship. Eliza stood with her family, watching the boys from the home pile their plates high, and felt a deep satisfaction. Reverend Wallace called for attention. Before we eat, I want to recognize someone. Eliza Rourke. Would you come forward? Confused, Eliza handed the baby to Jack and made her way to the front. 4 years ago, the minister began. This woman stood in this very spot and spoke truth to power. She faced down corruption and cruelty with nothing but courage and conviction. Since then, she's helped transform our town. The boys' home has given 12 young men a chance at a better life. Her compassion has helped heal wounds we didn't even know we had. Eliza, on behalf of Mercy's Bend, thank you for showing us how to be better than we were. The applause was thunderous. Eliza stood stunned as people she'd once feared rose to their feet, clapping and smiling. Mrs. Henderson was crying. Morrison was whistling. Even crusty old Peterson was wiping his eyes. Speech, someone called, and others took it up. Eliza looked out at the faces. Some had been cruel, some kind. All were human and flawed and trying. She thought of the lonely widow she'd been, isolated and afraid. That woman would have run from this attention, but she was someone else now. I'm not good at speeches, she began, her voice carrying clearly. But I know about second chances. This town gave me one when it could have destroyed me. My husband Jack gave me one when he saw something in me worth saving. Every boy at the home is getting one. That's what Mercy's Bend is now, a place of second chances. May we always remember that grace is stronger than judgment, and love more powerful than fear. As she returned to her seat amid renewed applause, Jack caught her hand. That's my wife, he said proudly. Still fighting battles, just with different weapons now. After the celebration, they walked home through the falling snow. Hope rode on Jack's shoulders, babbling about the feast. While Timothy carried the sleeping baby, Margaret walked beside Eliza, face thoughtful. "Next week," she said quietly. "I'll write to the federal marshal in Cheyenne next week. It's time. We'll be with you," Eliza promised. Every step, as they crested the rise to their home, lanterns glowing warm in the windows, Eliza paused to look back at the town spread below. Smoke rose from chimneys, lights twinkled in windows. Families were gathering for evening meals. It was just a small town in Wyoming, nothing special to most. But to her, it was proof that redemption was possible, that communities could change, that love could flourish in the rockiest soil. "You coming?" Jack called from the doorway, hope now drowsing against his chest. "Just taking a moment," she called back, "to be grateful." She thought of Thomas, hoping he knew justice had been served, of Luke, whose death had brought Jack to her, of all the pain that had led to this joy, the loneliness that had taught her to value connection, the cruelty that had shown her the importance of kindness. "You were worth loving," she whispered to the wind, remembering Jack's first gentle words to her. "You always were." Then she turned and walked into her home, where warmth and love waited. The lonely widow was just a memory now, a ghost laid peacefully to rest. In her place stood Eliza Rourke, mother, wife, advocate, friend. A woman who'd learned that sometimes the hardest battles lead to the sweetest victories, and that a life rebuilt on the ashes of despair can burn brighter than ever imagined. Inside, her family waited, Jack adding wood to the fire, Hope demanding one more story before bed, Timothy helping Margaret with the dishes, baby Thomas beginning to fuss for his evening feeding. It was chaos and noise and everything she'd never dared dream of in those dark days alone. As she stepped through the door into the light and warmth, Eliza smiled. She was home. Thank you for joining me on Eliza and Jack's incredible journey through the untamed frontier. Their story reminds us that even in our darkest moments, love and courage can light the way forward. I'd love to know where you're listening to this tale. Are you driving through your own mountains, sitting by a cozy fire, or perhaps falling asleep to the sound of the Wyoming wind? Please subscribe to From Wild West channel and share your thoughts below. Let's connect over these timeless stories of resilience, redemption, and the enduring power of love in the American West.